The thing a Formula One car can do? Stop. A Grand Prix racer can de-accelerate or brake much faster than it can accelerate. Brakes are like the line of a football team. They do a lot of work, but get very little glory.
When you think of these 1,200-pound vehicles made of space-age, super-light materials, cast iron does not often come to mind. But there is one area where this ancient, heavy metal still works best. The 4 disc brakes at each corner of the car. And do they work? Pulling over 2.3 Gs, a driver can de-accelerate from 180 miles an hour to 50 in just over 260 feet. This is a loss of 130 miles an hour in about 2.6 seconds. A fraction of the time and distance that it would take to gain that much speed. The biggest problem at this level of friction is heat. If it was dark while watching a car perform such maneuvers, you could see a streak of orange glow lighting up the entire wheel as the disc turned red hot. On-track operating temperatures reach 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit, and a full set of extra hard pads disappear in only 200 miles. Your road car pads should last 20 to 30,000, so the air cooling system becomes a top priority. The other difficulty is having all the pads grip the disc at the same time. If 2 calipers are used per disc, you have 16 pads that must work together. One major premature or late grab could send the car wildly out of control. The perfection of disc brakes in racing has led to the system being widely used by the car manufacturers. Let's look at the racing setup.
Now, when the driver pushes on the brake pedal, it activates these master cylinders where brake fluid is pumped through the steel lines out into the caliper. The caliper is what actually houses the brake pads, and these pads push on the disc, causing the de-acceleration or braking. That's where the friction comes in. Tremendous heat building up on this brake disc. The only way to cool it is by air. As you can see, it's hollow, ventilated. The design inside pumps air on the inside and out, trying to cool it as best as possible before the next corner. You get a little extra boost of air from this brake duct. At high speed, a ram air effect going through here and channeled down into the center of the ventilated disc. More air you can get through that disc, the faster they're going to cool. A set of discs like this costs about $450, and they're only good for one race. Simon Arkless of AP Racing, why do you go up and down the pit road putting psychedelic colors on all the discs?
Well, this is to ensure that the brake pads and the discs are all working at their optimum temperature. And this enables us to keep a check on the temperatures and adjust the cooling to suit. And it varies from circuit to circuit and from driver to driver. So we have to keep a pretty accurate check to make sure they're working at their best.
So each color goes off or burns at a different temperature?
Yes, it vaporizes and burns off at a different temperature so that we can control exactly the temperature the discs are working at.
It must be a nice thing to know.
Sure, yeah, that's right.
Even the most proven systems are under constant development in Formula One racing. For the latest state-of-the-art in making Formula One cars stop, we talked to Team McLaren's Steve Nichols, the only American engineer currently in Formula One.
McLaren International has the most experience with the second generation of discs. Steve, could you tell us a little bit about your system?
Well, our system uses discs that are made out of carbon instead of cast iron. It's a new material that's been developed in recent years, and the main advantage of it is that it's much lighter in weight than the normal cast iron sort of discs that most of the cars use.
What about their ability to actually stop the car? Is that better?
Yes, they actually stop the car quicker because they have a higher coefficient of friction, so they get better bite initially. They're less susceptible to temperature-related problems because they actually work better and better the hotter they get. These brakes work, operating temperature out on the track is maybe 700 degrees centigrade, where a cast iron brake operates maybe 450 to 550 degrees centigrade.
The mechanical failure a driver fears the most is loss of his brakes. Also, one of the greatest advantages to competitive driving is to master the fine art of late braking. We're going to talk to Nigel Mansell of John Player Team Lotus about these 2 points.
Nigel, how do you go about actually judging the point of braking on a circuit like this?
Well, there's 2 ways of doing it. I always do it by eyesight, watching the corner and just sort of judging the speed and the entry. And there's another way of sort of having markers on the side of the circuit, which is sometimes good, except when you come back the next day they've moved or they've disappeared or whatever. So I always sort of use my own eyesight to judge.
Now, the majority of passing is done under braking also. What's that like to be pushing someone into a corner trying to get by?
Well, it depends who they are. It can be pretty hairy, or you can, you know, have a very good maneuver, and it can be very satisfying when you get past. But there are a few drivers that you've got to get right alongside to get past them, because otherwise they'll move across on you, and obviously one can have an accident if that happens.
It's very spectacular when you see the great puff of tire smoke and coming up from the wheels, but that's really not the greatest way to slow down, is it?
No, as soon as you've locked the wheels, then it's negative braking. In fact, you're starting to slide, and not only that, you're hurting the tyres. It's a detriment to the tyres, so much so that you can flat spot, what is known as flat spotting the tyre. And if you do that badly enough, it means you've got to come and make a pit stop and change all 4.
Well, have you ever had an accident because of a brake failure? They don't have many mechanical failures, but once in a while it's pretty spectacular.
I went through a bad time 3 years ago in Formula One, where I had more than my fair share, but I've had, touch wood, I've had very, very good mechanics, and the JPS, the John Player Lotus team, have been very good from the point of view of mechanical failures. But 3 years ago, in fact, to this race, I had a brake failure in one of the chicanes out the back, and it was the union just broke off the side of the caliper, and there was just no brakes at all going into one of the turns. And needless to say, I went into the wall quite heavily, but walked away from it. It wasn't very comfortable, I can assure you.
What does that do to your confidence? Every time you put your foot on that pedal and push down, you expect it to work. Does something like that make you think about it working more often, or?
Well, you change your underpants and then you get in the car again. But seriously, I think it probably takes a couple of laps of, you know, reassuring yourself the brakes are going to be there, because now on some of the turns you're going into them at 200 miles an hour, and it's essential you have your brakes. But it's not something that fortunately happens every day. You've got to be unlucky if they do fail. And you just build yourself up, and if you're a professional racing driver like most of us are, then there's no problem. You go about your business and do your job.
Well, Nigel, we hope that you stop quickly and safely every time at this Zandvoort circuit.
Yeah, I hope so too.
One of the greatest late breakers of all times, Mario Andretti, summed it all up when he said, "Brake a half a second too soon and 2 cars will pass you. A half a second too late and you're going to hit the wall."